taste of insanity. You remember the vast dimensionality of the multiverse reduced into this very, very one-dimensional, tiny stream of data going across the screen, created by the illusion of consciousness, in the illusion of time, in the illusion of space that is created by the illusion of consciousness. If you take a book and you look at the book through the lens that experiences the taste, touch, smell, sounds, words of the book, in a moment, it digests all of that information in all of its dimensionality, because we have to remember that 99.9% of what's out there, of what's going on here, is not coming in here. There is light in this space that is not measured by your eyes because it's outside of the spectrum your eyes are capable of measuring. There is sound here that is not being measured by your ears because your ears are not calibrated to digest and process sound in those wavelengths. And that's just sound and sight outside. What about the other dimensions that we do not have the processing sense of language to digest? Only a vague sense of imagination of the vast spectral range of possibility out there at the edge of imagination. What about that? That's happening here, unspoken, unknown, and unknown that it is unknown. What about that? Because this begins to touch the totality of all that is. And insanity touches upon my awareness as I realize I cannot take you in to the quality of silence, to the qualitative space of silence that I wake up in. I cannot take you into the vertical time, not bound to the lineal time of voice that I process in. Perhaps I should say that we process in. It's just that our cult, called culture, is so narrow, so thin, so rare. In the moments you are invited to have a conversation such as this, if you call it a conversation, that I've never talked with you, or you, or you, or you. I've never talked. You, as a cult, have never slowed down enough for me to see you in this crevice of the cultural mind. Do you think in vertical time? You see, everything slows down to a moment here. Each word crossing the eye, piece by piece by piece, creating the composition, the picture, your own personal picture. Every frame of the film crosses this lens, where the entire possibility field of the psyche that could be watching, because this eye is very unique. It's framed with memory, it's framed with belief, it's framed with attitude, it's framed with culture. It's framed with language. And if it doesn't register, if there isn't a word to illuminate what is passing by, it is invisible. Frame by frame going past that eye. But what if you're too tired of the mediocrity of such slow motion, singular dimensionality? What if you're so tired and let your mind roam? Is it as a poet, a genius, or as someone outside the gate of the cult's walls who becomes insane in your eyes because you cannot enter the scattered pattern of their mind? Because you can follow this, and they are going here, 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 here. A logical pattern. Except you don't see what's going on out here. You don't see the face that is composed of the pattern. Because your attention is right here. There's this wonderful clip. I love it. Because I'm not talking on the outside of this prism of a prison. I'm in here with you, stuck in the myopia of language, stuck in the prism of culture, trying to make sense of culture within its own prism. And of course, set theory, mathematical set theory. One of the rules, you can never understand a set from within the set. One must step outside. We call someone insane when we can no longer establish the relationship of the data points. Now, lineal time is always going on, but there's vertical time. Thank heavens, there is vertical time. This is the meta about the meta about the meta, the conversation about the conversation about the conversation that is happening faster than speech. If I talk like this and that, it becomes a little bit too difficult to be present. Our bodies operate at a different speed. We're made of calcium and minerals that took millions of years to form. Our bodies have evolved over millions of years, and our thoughts, like lightning, occur in a way that we have not penetrated as a science. There is no scientist that can construct a thought in a test tube. There are scientists who can construct symbols in a test tube that a human will turn into thought. A scientist can construct and reproduce the digital signature of this image, of these sounds, and you can turn them into thought. Science cannot create a thought. There is not a single scientist on the planet that can engineer a thought that thinks itself. But you are the scientist who can do it, who does not know how or why it is reproduced. despite 10,000 cult stories throughout history about how and why. Which means that at least for now, it's up to you. Pick a story about how and why your thoughts, your consciousness exists. Pick a story and make it a good one. Make it a good one. Design a plot in which you have a purpose. That's an interesting purpose. Why not? Vertical thoughts. In the still moments in which I cannot yet open my mouth, those parts of consciousness that can sip tea, that can stumble around in the kitchen, following the mechanical train of filling a cup of water in the kettle, pressing the little button that tells me the water will soon be hot, looking in the boxes of tea to find that no, there is no rose hip here, only an assortment of green and black teas, so that I will settle on jasmine. You see, we're into poetry, into a rhythm. But does this rhythm correspond to a receiver in your mind? You who live in a cult that segments so many of our faces of self off to the side and specializes in the lineal logic of rational, reductionist, scientific, capitalistic, masculine focus to get something, however absurd, however destructive, however repetitious, to get something done. Done, done, done. The rhythm of our culture, faster and faster, as the train roars to the edge. And how far will we fall before we wake up in this falling dream and wonder, what am I doing here? Falling over a cliff of doing and doing and doing and doing. What am I doing here? Will I wake up from this simulation, this dream, and do a recall, a reset of the game? Or do I not have time for this, at least for now, as I put another bit of coal, another bit of diesel, another solar cell on the train that's rushing forward to the edge? What do I do here? Who am I in this tale, and where is it going? I cannot tell you, I can only point you to the edge of the limitations that box us in, to the edge of the infinite unknown that is so much bigger than what we know, or what we know we don't know. The infinite unknown that is 1 trillion times bigger than the unknown that we know we do not know. Vertical time, rustlings, a small shape in the corner of my eye. What is happening there beyond my sensory perception? A clue that something soft and furry like a rabbit wants to, what? Come into my arms? What? Be talked about in the little box we have constructed here? Be felt about off screen because it is not appropriate for this culture, focused on language, math, money, power, and words, to talk about something so soft yet so ephemeral it doesn't fit onto the screen, or maybe just a little. But how long will you stay? How long will you stay? For the words that do not seem to go anywhere, that instead, unlike the point we always try to arrive to, get to the point, what is the point, get to the point, unlike the point we always try to arrive to, will instead create a scatter pattern that suggests the fuzzy edge of a circle we have no place for. In a culture divided by hard lines, will we stay? Will we stay for the party that has been arranged for us all? Or is this getting a little intense for the narrow band processor created by this cult's eyes, this culture's lies, by the narrow chop, chop, chop of a second hand that says, I have no time for this. Where is this going? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? There's no time for the journey. And so, reflecting on the many loose ends, we did not finish the journey into hell. We put so many of our infants in and on. The dreams that I had are not finished in my evening mind. The tea that wants to be drunk, the view so much more interesting than here. The view. What can we see in the garden? Because as you look here in the frame of our culture's interest, there is a garden out there. When does the dance become so fragmented, so disintegrated, that we lose touch? When? Do we lift off from the gravitational pull of the norm in to the Everglades, the ever-gliding waves of possibility? And where does she take us? Where does she take us? And do I stay here, trying to finish the pieces that took me in a moment of shuffling feet from my bed to the tea ritual, from the tea ritual down the hall to what is the space created for this work, all the while exploring a universe too big to capture in words, too big to say in a timely way. Because it is always out there, always in here, that the magic, pausing. Have I lost you? Have I gone too quickly through too many spaces? Have I lost you? Can I find you again? Okay. Vertical time, as I experience it, moving to a new and more rational persona. Oh, thank heavens, in the cult of the rational. But there are many cults, many cultures, many faces. Each have their place at the circular table of self. Each has been honored and refined into its gift and brings a service to us all, or has been dishonored and become the curse, the uninvited guest, that does not disappear, but points a finger at those faces on the table who have divided itself into too many parts to function as a whole, and say, you will face the sharp side of me, who you do not invite to your table, who you do not respect. Look and keep looking at who you are in me. You who dishonor yourself such that you dishonor me. There is a curse by the line you have drawn to divide me and you. And that line will cut through the cloth you have woven to protect the dogma that you call this life. It will cut through the dogma you call this life and seem in the cutting like your enemy. And yet, I have never been your enemy. It is the dogma that you call this life that obscures the view of the circle, that honors you, and that you were meant to honor. It is all of us, the light and the shadow, the beauty, the chaos, the intensity, and the dreary myopia of boredom, because you have tuned in from a vast and infinite unknown into a narrow thread that can see nothing of little, rather than everything of all. You who manufacture boredom from the tedium of your myopic eyes. I is the beginning of the end. I see this. I think this. The myopia, the beginning of the end. The boredom that takes the multiverse down to a single point, to the exclusion of all others. The myopia that makes everyone the enemy. Of the narrow beam illusion constructed by single point focus, when reality is circular and looks different depending on which side of the circle you look from. The dot is the closest to here, the M is the closest to here. Who is right? Doesn't it depend on context? And isn't the journey to understand how another I legitimately arrived at the very opposite of what you see? Isn't it more interesting to understand how another I, zoomed in tight, is seeing red when you, zoomed in tight, are seeing blue? Not because reality is red or blue, but because of the place and the time you zoomed into. Isn't that more interesting? To start living in a world where there is a color wheel that has room for two. than the narrow beam focus of one eye. And I will destroy. I will cut through the lines you make to keep me out, because they keep you out too. I am your soul. I am the one cutting the strings that tie you into tired, narrow lives. I am the one dismantling the simple plots in your film that keep most of who you are on the outside, comfortably within party lines. I am the one who, given a breath of fresh air, a glass of clean wine, take you outside of yourself to see who you are on the outside in all your dirt, and the beauty of that dirt in all the broken fragments you tried to complete the picture that would keep me out, and with it yourself. I am coming in from the outside, weaving a web more complex, destined to succeed, because you are a tiny part of you within the self of you, at war with everything else that is you. And you cannot win this war, little one. You cannot win this war, little one, because to do battle, for this finger to do battle to the body, were it dumb enough to succeed, destroys itself. But how many veins, how many eyes can one finger poke out before the body stops functioning and supplying the finger blood, and the finger has no more energy to complete its delusional mission of self-destruction? When we zoom in too tightly and say, this is me, and everyone else is the enemy, I must cheat them and fight them and attack them and make sure their ideas do not spread, so that my narrow beam thought will live. I am always at war with something infinitely bigger than myself, or more accurately, I am at war with the psyche that holds more of me in it than I myself can fit into this narrow lens. I am at war with a self I have forgotten in the myopia of narrow beam willful ignorance, perpetuated by the cult in which I was raised, perpetuated by the traumatic cycle. The traumatic cycle that says to every human being, if you want to meet your needs to survive, to feel secure, to be loved and belonging, you must look like this, talk like this, believe like this, do like this, think like this, look like this. And then there is the line, and on the other side of the line, that is what we do not talk about. That is what must be kept secret. This is what we do not do around here. And no, we do not think we do not do. And yet the reason is not the invention of good and bad. The cultural's narrow lens that says gay and lesbian people, oh, they are like this. People who have a little bump called a penis, they are like this. And people who have a little bump called a clitoris, they are like this. And that cannot be done like this and this. The real reason is that we are too small. We are too small to digest the full cake at a moment in time. And so if we are lucky, we will start out Republican until we get to the edge of that dogma and it seems stale. And then we will become independent until we encounter something that does not fit into that box either, which if we live truly and look, will not be hard to see. And then we will be democratic, believing in the beauty of freedom and justice for all to the exclusion of every other value. And we'll see and honor this for a while before we realize that this too, particularly in the ways it is practiced, is not satisfying. And there's a whole wheel yet of undefined parties and undefined party lines to explore before we get back home where we began, seeing again perhaps some beauty in tradition, perhaps some honor, in a smaller power structure and more emphasis on the ego, some honor in a cult that values a deity bigger than itself. And yet, if we stay in narrow boxes, and what if we do go through the journey? Will our friends come with us? Will the father who kept his peace with his own mind by following the narrow threads of the grandfather who beat him into submission, into the message deep and long as a 2-year-old boy, the message that you must follow this line or be killed or be abandoned or be disowned, because we in this family do this, and we have no space for a boy who feels and does a little bit differently, just a little bit, enough to be far outside the narrowness of our lines, but well within the circle of humanity. We disown the parts of ourselves that are out there, living the lives we could have lived, but chose not to. We could have empathized with, but lack imagination. We could have known that were it but for 2-3 twists on the dial, the intensity of our values, the hierarchy of values, truth before pleasure, pleasure before truth, both faces of beauty, but which comes first for you when you meet a fork in the road and must choose one or the other in one moment? Truth, pleasure, truth, pleasure, pleasure, truth, Which comes first, and is one evil because you did not choose it? Or is one part of you saying goodbye to another part of you in the fork of the road that is necessary when we have such narrow consciousness that we can only see one thing at a time, we can only hear one word at a time and have it make sense? Vertical time offers the luxury of possibility at a faster speed than we can talk, such that a few short shuffles, not yet awake from one room to this, lead. So many things to say that cannot be said. So many things to explore that my body will lose consciousness long before the words catch up to a geometric image, the image of one cat's face on a 4K screen at 1 bit per second, at 1 word per second, could take thousands of years to articulate. And this is why perhaps one of the most exciting things in the small thread of a few hundred possibilities emerging in consciousness in the slow brain, not yet leaving dream time, in which lifetimes can be lived in a fraction of a second that are not bound to this time of words. Perhaps the most exciting and important eventuality, arrival point in that mind of mine trapped in our culture, so focused on the point. What is the point? Is there a point? Where shall I go? And will my body collapse before I get there? Will my mind drift off into some fantastic place before I continue and finish this thought? Of it all, I come to the conclusion we must have multidimensional communication tools. We must create the virtual reality, the hyperspace, in which information is transmitted visually. Because had you been there in that time in which images far outside the spectrum of normal consciousness came together, had you been there, the few short paces from that room to this, shuffling along, holding my tea, would have taken you into worlds we cannot begin to touch here. We have only grazed along like a butterfly tasting pollen, a little of this and a little of that. We have only grazed along. We have only flown through the surface, and yet it is much deeper than you or I can see. We have not been trained to feel the depth and breadth of words, the energies contained in the boxcars of their meaning. We have not learned to explode with the sensuality, the crescendo of a single word and its hundreds of thousands of associations packed into every sentence in which it has been used in this lifetime. A crescendo of cinnamon, cloves, ginger, and black, bitter tea. You might have joined me there, looking at objects crystallizing enough for consciousness to get the message and go there in space-time, in hyperspace, and see worlds that we will never share because they're on the outside of what the weight of language will support. They're on the outside. And how many get the training? How many get the training to begin to illuminate those journeys into words, so that when you ask him, Papa, what are you thinking? And he wakes from many journeys to say nothing at all, that we know this is not true. This is not true. It's just too difficult for him to take us there through the eyes that he sees through. And perhaps too painful to take us there through the eyes that we see through, so clear that we are right, that we are better than him. Perhaps there is not enough energy in the older body to take 3 hours to explain a moment. And perhaps we don't want to know, sure, that there is nothing there. That we already know the important things in life because we've studied calculus and we're better than everyone else. Just like every cult in the 10,000 stories of human history that say, this is how it is. Everyone else has it wrong. Why should we bother? We already know so much more than he. So let's patronize the old man. Leave him to the journeys into worlds we do not know, we do not know. That he may himself filter out to fit into the little box created for old men. Just imagination, just a thought. That greatest of doorways that takes us to the unknown of the unknown. That opening, waiting to take us home, on the other side of a very short journey here into lineal time. What is on the other side? Is it not something much more interesting than the narrow band lines we have drawn here to box us in and make us feel certain? Certain in a way that helps protect us from the traumatic wound of overwhelming terror that happens in infancy at 1 and 2 years old, when you cry and ask, Mother, where art thou? Where have you gone? What is that noise of gunfire coming from the box that takes all of your attention away from me? Where have you gone? And what is that noise and that smell? Please come here. Please come back to me. And the crying of an ocean of tears is silenced by a pill put off into a room, and we wonder, what have we done coming here? When will this torment end? We don't want to go into those empty rooms of childhood in which so many lies were told to the face of one who could see, and one who knew they were being asked to to stay far, far away in the repertoire of lies designed to protect comfortable blind spots, comfortable yet repetitive, addictive frames of behavior, frame after frame after frame, that kept us on the outside of the addiction, of the wall, that kept us on the other side, unable to connect, unable to grieve and cry the truth because the truth could not be told. We do not want to go into those infant rooms and find her huddling there, out of view, in the corner, crouched, lonely and weeping. Why do they want me to be here? Why don't they want me by their side? Why do they want to be lost in a bottle? Why do they not join me in these magical rooms in which gold and light is always taking shape? Just beyond the edge, you can see the shadow. Before the form, it is magnetic. It is captivating. Why don't you join me here instead of there in that bottle, that pill, that repetitive cycle of addictive behavior you call work, that you call your love for me? Why? Why don't you join me here? I don't want to go into that place, and so what is strong and rigid enough to capture me and take me away from those thoughts in which I was alone for so long? The dogma, the drug of every cult. Are you keeping busy? Just focus on the positive. Don't think that thought. Step out of the frame that was designed to hold you. And don't exist. Let the lines, let the words and abstract ideas this cult uses to define you, let them stand in your place as you are offset, off camera, alone, repeating the platitudes handed to you in the language given to you, in the paradigms shoved down your throat. This is not going anywhere. If we follow the thread into another's heart and mind, we will find a part of ourself we did not know we did not know. And we will be the bigger for it, because between you and me, between any two electrons, between the nucleus and the proton, there is an infinite amount of space. Whenever two or more are gathered, there is an infinite amount of space, and it is the space between you and me, the dance between him and her. It doesn't matter if you have a penis or a clitoris, between him and her, the one who listens, the one who speaks, the one who moves, the one who responds, the one who asks, and the one who says yes or no. There is an infinite amount of space in the relationship of self to self. And when we understand and love and accept another for who they are, we begin a journey into that space where we can feel, in the space between a nucleus, a proton, in the space between one atom. There are so many thousands of units of space more than the unit of mass in the particles in relationship. Whenever two or more are gathered, there is a space between that is much bigger than the two dots that frame the space, feminine energy, the silence, the unknown, the void, is always bigger than the line that frames the edge of that silence, the edge of the black hole. This feminine, massive presence, the silence in our midst where we do not turn our gaze, the silence between words that we have been trained to avoid, the vertical time that is in any moment when we open to the dream that is coming through us, the vertical moment that is always open. We lose when we train our eye to go from this letter to this without pause, to feel la. What is in there? What is in that sound that we do not know? And do you block it? And why? Are you so afraid that the woman you murdered will murder you? Are you so afraid that the grace and the presence that we have systematically denied in a cult that will not give you a single hour to study emotion or presence, but will give you unlimited reserves to study math, to study letters, to study culture? It will give you as much time and praise as you need for postdoctoral and postgraduate work. But when will it teach you to sit down and be in her presence, the presence of one who was born with you and then shoved away? She is much bigger. She is the space, the one who stands with you always, between the letter and the letter, the word and the word, between you and another. She is the space between you and another. And she is the unknown, and she will usher in death that you cannot imagine. And she will usher in birth that you cannot imagine. And she is part of an ocean that is much bigger than you can cross alone. She is the space between, the silence between, the unknown unknown. And she is here for you. She, in her presence, radiant in ways you cannot count. You cannot notice those ways because they are bigger than the limited eye. She is the one who sets the table for the circle that you are, and the circle that perhaps in a lifetime, perhaps in many, perhaps with a body, perhaps without. She sets the table for you. And you, like so many pouting infants, dishonor her. Dishonor her by honoring a culture that denies her, by honoring a culture in which she is not welcome, in which fast, staccato, prioritization of what is known always comes first. Always comes first. And we will end it there. In the unknown unknown of what would have been said next had we continued. In the unknown unknown of where you will go in the silence on the other side of this moment. Continuing, there is movement. The neighbor next door is starting a new furniture project, and the tap, tap, tap in the background becomes a part of this ecology. The air conditioner has, through a series of power surges and power failures in the power grid of the apartment complex and perhaps other things, given up the ghost with a few drips. It's been another 24 hours and things have moved up and down, forward, back. New things have entered. And in this profile of the psyche, in which I come to grips with what's going on the inside, what's going on the outside, and how to find right relationship, how to find balance, medicine, healing in the dance. As I grapple with that in this project, one of the dimensions we deal with in the arena of the psyche, we have, we'll just draw it on the outside here, we have the triad of heart, mind, and body. We have the triad of emotions, of thoughts, and of physiology, which are not that dissimilar, except for certain, well, they're not that dissimilar in the sense that there is no thought that we have in an embodied state that does not change our physiology. And we get into this chicken and the egg dynamic where did the thought change the body, or did the body change the thought, or both? Can it go both ways? Can the wheel that turns right also turn left? Can the direction change? And what changes the direction? Is it the witness? Is it consciousness? Is it outer force, or both? I had a dream last night of a tidal wave. It's a very interesting thing in which reality that's flat starts to become vertical, and it wasn't even clear it was a tidal wave of water. It was a tidal wave. And the people slowly moved up on the slices of reality and began sliding down. And yet, the reality did not seem to be swamped by the waves. I don't recall death in the sliding. And in the dimension of physiology, in which every emotion has a thought, every thought generates an emotion, every thought changes the physiology, every emotion changes the physiology, every physiology changes the emotion. You ever wonder if you're really feeling depressed and terrible, or if your sandwich is just being digested? Which is it? Does it matter? What creates our felt experience? Now, on a physiological level, and I want to go back to this little boy in the abuse cycle of our culture. The little boy gets born to two parents with PTSD. A mother who has been sexually abused, a father who has been emotionally and physically violated, a father who has been exposed to the horror of psychedelics without the container, a father who is wigged out with terror and fear, and emotionally in many ways 6 years old, a corresponding age to the 4-year-old emotional mother. And these people, in the terror of their day, these people, grappling with the terrains of the psyche that are induced by helplessness, by betrayal, by lies, by the smallness in response to the giants of their parents, these people, finding the parts on the outside that they cannot relate to on the inside, that they are too overwhelmed to relate to on the inside. How do they evoke the terror and helplessness within their own inner psyche at the emotional age within which they reside? How do they grapple with that when given the innocence, the complete femininity, the surrender, the openness of a newly born infant? And how does a mother attune emotionally to a child when she must dissociate from the deepest emotions in her own body? Which means dissociating from all emotion. Because one cannot swim in a lake and protect a certain arm or a certain part of the body from getting wet. One either goes in and the whole body is wet, and one deals with the currents in that river, in the currents of that lake. That water touches the self, or one stays out of the water. And what happens when the baby is born deep in that water of emotion, and there is no mother to greet him, because she is far, far away, in a pinnacle of fantasy in her mind, created to protect her from the deeps, that no one was there to help a 4-year-old child as a young girl digest, process, and move through. How does a 4-year-old traumatized, dissociated rape survivor nurture and facilitate the emotional dignity and value in her son? What does she do instead? Does she put him in the dryer and turn it on to see what happens? She did. Does she play abandonment games in the forest, taking him out into the unknown, where everything is so big and so strange, and leave him there to watch his tears of dissociation, his panic that he will be left again? Does she hit him with a belt, with cooking utensils, to stop the crying that threatened to take her back into her own pain? Or does she somehow transcend in an emotionally illiterate culture? Does she somehow transcend that psychic terrain and become a perfect mother? How does a 4-year-old girl in a culture such as ours grow up to be worthy of the responsibility of growing the innocence of a child into adulthood? How does she meet him emotionally, mentally, when the thoughts that are so fuzzy and so painful, the thoughts at the gates of human awareness, are so fuzzy and so painful? There are no angels to welcome her into this world. As her intellectual facility comes on and looks at the horror of what it sees, it does not want to be here. It does not want to be in a world that abandons little girls to these things, to these lies. It wants to be far, far away in a fantasy, up here. And so she goes there, far away from the reality that we must deal with here. And how does she guide the boy to be here when she is up here? How can she understand his horror? The horror that she invites, precipitates inside his mind. How does she be with him in those wounds that she cannot deal with on her own? And why should she? A classic stereotype of the dumb blonde, endlessly infatuated with her own body, mirroring the infatuation of a cult that obsesses about her breasts, that obsesses about her milky skin, the appearance of a young age, that wants to rape her one more time, again and again and again, that tells her she's done all she needs to do by being the object of attraction. And her body does it so well. Why should she leave this fairy tale of success and go down into the cobwebbed basement of her past, where no one is waiting to honor the courage of her journey there, where no one stands ready to hold her in the tears that burst forth when she faces that little girl again for the first time in years and says, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I've left you here for so long. I'm so sorry I've left you for so long." What does she do? Why not stay up there and let this child swim around in the murky swamps of her basements, where her feelings really are, where he can connect with the truth of who she is, however dark, and leave him coming of age, trying to make sense of emotions too horrific to feel alone, and yet alone with a mother who will not join him in the swamps of her own sadness, which he feels for her. A child who has not yet learned to cut off, to cut the ropes of the messengers that deliver the news hour by hour by hour. This is how you feel. This is how you feel. This is how you feel. Who has not taken the machete to those chords of the heart that sing with sadness and joy equally, depending upon how they are played. He has not cut those ropes yet, nor does he want to. He wants to be joined down in those dark places, and he wants them to be lifted. He wants her to own the sadness that is hers. He wants her father to take back the shame that he gave to the generational cycle of abuse. He wants to give it back to them, and he wants them to own that this is not his problem, that he is not the bane of their existence, but is in fact a messenger that can integrate, if welcomed and honored, centuries of patterns, centuries of energies of betrayal and abuse, nationally, internationally, in the family. He can speak those words if he is welcome, but not if he is beaten down, cursed, cast out, and told, this is all you. All the ugliness you see and hear. It is not us. We are pristine. We do not make mistakes. It is all you. That ugliness you feel, it's you. Get away from me with that ugliness. He cannot go into these realms alone, cast out in the projected demonization of her own dread and fears. These giants who purport to be gods, who dictate the law, who exercise the demon wheel of trauma, dissociation, and the withholding of love. The withholding of love. The withholding of the three core needs in Maslow's hierarchy: survival, security, and belonging. You will not survive, little one, unless you take this curse and own it. You must occupy the role as the cursed one, who represents everything in ourselves we want to forget. Carry it. Go down with it. And then it is not enough. You must put a mask on. And you must smile in the mask. We will draw a smile on that mask. Smile, mask. Smile. Let us pretend that the fuzzy fur of wool sweaters, the soft caress of a mother's baby-powdered hands on genitals, the sensation, the violation of boundaries, let us pretend that these are happy times. That there is pleasure of a sickly nature around here. Just plaster a smile and be the mask of our happy little boy who wants to be seen, and that is the only thing we will not grant you. We will not give you the voice to speak. We will silence that voice. We will not give you the honor and dignity of your emotions. We will silence that voice. We will shame you for what you feel. We will shame you for what you think. We will abuse and humiliate you for the confused weavings of your mind, as you try and piece together two worlds, the world of what you know and feel, and the world of what we tell you you ought to think, you ought to do, you ought to want to do, and you ought to feel. We do not want to see who you are. We want to see who we want you to pretend to be. And no, we are not denying who you are. No, that is you. We are not denying who you are. We know who you are, and it is not you. We know you are this. We know you are happy about this. We know you are grateful about this. We know you are a horrible person when you are here. We know this. We have created a new language to recategorize the fabric of reality and shoved it in your face. And it is you who reject our voice. It is you who reject this mask that we know is true. It is you who does not want to be seen as you are meant to be. We want to see you, just not as you are. And we don't want to see that we don't want to see you as you are. We want to see that you really are our delusion, but you prefer to be something else, something dirty. You prefer to be what you call yourself, but that is not you, and that has nothing to do with us. We want no part of that. Just be this, and all will be well, and the fairy tale can end with a small smile with a wolf in sheep's clothing, devouring the young. And no one complains in this drama. There are too many wolves in sheep's clothing to awaken this dream. But the ones being devoured, the innocent lambs who are born day by day, who are fed to the wolves, in the instant before they are crushed, in the instant before they die, they know it was a lie. And they know that no one wanted to see. No one wanted to see. And the child, in a last effort of the innocence of love, went silent and became invisible. One of the things I'm struck by, as it's now maybe 12 hours later and the end of the day, is the delicate process of revealing the many dimensions of our psyche. Because this is not about me. I'm the focus point in this exercise, in this effort to bring light on who we are as a species, as consciousness, as the full dimensions of self. But the same intricacy, the same care must be spent on every single human being and their unique expression of their psyche for us to begin to grasp the intricacies of who we are, of where we're going, of what's possible, and what it's like to be human. I come in here every time trying to capture something, and invariably it's a journey into some different domain within the psyche that needs to speak in a way that my acculturated brain has not prepared me for, cannot lead the way towards, because it is in the unknown, and sometimes the unknown. But then sometimes we have small windows in something that is fairly easy. We talked about the 3 quadrants, and I've been paying attention to the physical. This morning my sweetheart had a violent bellyache and flung herself into the bed, startling me awake and needing Tiger Balm rubbed on her belly. I rubbed the Tiger Balm on her belly, tried to get back to sleep, but found myself captured in a headache that moved from here over to here, so that every time I tried to wake up, every time I tried to think for the next 6 hours, it was too painful to come to consciousness with 2 headaches, and so I cushioned my face with a pillow and laid in bed. My legs have been going numb for the last 10 years. Fears, tightness, panic that grips me with a certain promise of certainty in the face of deep childhood uneasiness, rolling hills that feel like earthquakes, anchored by a certainty in my muscles that is not conscious, it is instinctive, but it is crippling and numbing my legs nonetheless. I find myself facing terrors so intense that I let my legs take them away with the clenching of such certainty that cannot breathe. It is killing the psyche as well as the body. And yet, where is the self that can consciously receive that level of terror? A self that until recently has not known the meaning of the word trauma or the arenas of the brain that hold the traumatic self. How can a conscious self embrace a phenomena like Medusa when to look in her eyes directly is to begin the process of petrifying into stone? How? So my legs go through waves of clenching and declenching. And I wake up some days befuddled in the pain of an adolescent and a child that does not know how to respond to the terrors presented to them at the moments they crystallized into a frozen age inside, with the overwhelming panic that says, I don't know what to do, I've got to turn away. How can I, without an answer to their problems, invite them to look back at me, saying, Dane, I do not have the answer. It's 10, 20, 30 years later. And in the microwave, potato chip, sitcom culture that I've lived in, I have no more answer to these crises within than you at 7 years old. But I want you to look at me and share the burden of your petrified, frozen silence with me. Because you should never have been alone with these crises, with these terrors, with these unconscious states tipped like a wheelbarrow from my parents' garden onto you. Too vulnerable to carry the load, bent down and crushed by the burden that no one would acknowledge was even there. Crippled by the shame of reaction to forces too big to deal with by you. And strangely, outside of the cultural purview, problems too big for you to deal with, yet seemingly too small to acknowledge. You held on for dear life to my legs, and I thank you for finding a life raft to hang on to, even if the rusty nails of the old shipwrecked boards pierced your flesh with the tetanus carried of this world. You found something as the nails punched through and hung all the more tightly to the pain that was the only constant in an up and down, high and low, rocking of waves too big to control, too big to fathom. But there nonetheless, taking you to strange islands where you have yet to be found again. Leg pain, clenching, huddling, not wanting to see, pain in the head, pain in the eyes, and then what to do with the heaviness of depression and fear, what to do with the tiredness, the fatigue. For over a week, I've had ear pain in this ear. Hydrogen peroxide will no longer clear the passage. And the question is, when coupled with a back pain just above my sphincter muscle that aches and cries, the question is how to respond as a huddled child to these problems. How to respond to the messages I know must be there in these dreams of earthquakes, these dreams of tidal waves. The back pain that tells me again there is no support, that people are pulling you down again, pulling you for this and pulling you for that, but not lifting you up to your blossoming or your truth? What do I need to do? What am I not hearing? What is the headache today? And how do I, an 8-year-old boy, filled with the resentment, with the jealousy and self-loathing of one who knows he is wearing a mask and knows that whatever the cost to him, the greatest taboo is to remove and speak his truth. What is the din of that pain in his ears? Today, getting out of bed, making a video, riding up the mountain towards the temple. I pause at the lookout garden. The owner of the restaurant. How are you? I am sad. What happens? How are you? I am sad. What happened? I don't want to call out my life across 10 restaurant tables. Come over here and sit down if you want to know. But as so often, when there is something to see, no one wants to look. She hurries away. Sitting and rubbing my head, drinking the fresh coconut juice, I wonder how I will take care of the young feelings of the traumatized wounds. In the 5-year-old self, the 6-year-old terror of my partner's wounds, my partner's trauma. How will I take care of her when she cannot take care of me? How will I take care of myself when yet again, beginning with the story of my mother, it was my job to take care of her, a 4-year-old boy, an 8-year-old liar, putting on faces but always taking care of her. And what about me? Can I swim in these rapids when busily focused on another? Is there someone in the room, someone in the circle who can take care of me? There's a prostitute at the nearby town. Since the moment I looked in her eyes, I've been touched by an aliveness and a presence I have rarely known in any other face. A presence that grows dim in my own eyes that face death. Literal or figurative, I have not been able to discern. But something awakens when I spend time with her body. She responds to my touch, the caress of her hands on my legs. You see in Thailand the delineation between goddess, masseuse, healer, prostitute is not written in stone. It's not cut and dry. These are all faces of necessity, grace, chance, magic, and beauty. Some taking us down, devolving, breaking integrity, some lifting up. I have agreements with my sweetheart. I cannot make genital contact. I cannot touch the breasts. I cannot kiss the lips. But I have not bound myself so fully that I cannot feel and enjoy the grace as she ripples in my arms, her breath moving, catching, flowing with the opening of our touch, her eyes curious, intense, awakening, feeling and flowing something that is beyond words. That is on the one hand chemistry and on the other magic. A chemistry that gestalts new flows into being. And I know, sitting there rubbing my eyes as I try and figure out the line, I know I want to see her for the sexual energy she evokes like no one other. Just looking in her eyes. She knows the boundary, I have explained it. And she responds, teasing me, inviting me to cross the line. I've never had a problem breaking vows. I've never lied or cheated once. So I smile, appreciate the compliment that she's on some level so into me. She wants me to cross, not for money. She does not ask for more than the customary $9 for a Thai massage. And yet we go much further, opening chakras, touching heart, talking about the blocks inside her and I, sharing worlds, looking at tensions as she lays in my arms, touching my legs like no other. I want to be with her. But first I must include my partner, clear on what I want, as we move closer to marriage. A piece of paper, to be sure. Closer to marriage. A visa requirement, certainly. Closer to marriage. A dangerous word, clouded with 100,000 shades of cultural meaning that have little or nothing to do with us. So I come back to the apartment and hold my sweetie in my arms and talk about what's going on in us. The parts we connect, the parts that are not met, the parts ascending and descending, the parts growing towards marriage, and the parts outside, emotionally questioning why we are here, because their voice is not heard, is not honored inside the container of our relationship. And a new contract, a new shuffling, a new honoring, and light comes in. The depression lifts. I'm no longer taking care of mom more than myself. And away I go, seeing the market for the first time. Alive, like I have not been in Thailand for a while, with my mind wrestling. How will I fit myself inside another's problem? And dance with the healer, the goddess, the dragon, the prostitute, the woman, 23, among the most sensuous women I have ever touched. No need for penetration. There are energies in play that captivate my mind, captivate our presence as she opens and flows into her own orgasm, not needing to touch or be touched, but just flowing together. I feel in some ways it is a crime not to take her, not to feel her fully, with her offer, wrapped in a towel waiting to be unwrapped. But I cannot cross the line. At one point, she lets the towel slip and I put it back. This is not about sex of the body, but something bright, something going on outside the culture's lens of perception, and yet I come alive. Something that was dying starts to blossom just a little at the edge and foments the cauldron. How do I respond to this back pain? I do not know. I know it comes at times in these videos, perhaps because you look at me as the critical lens this cult has woven you to see. Perhaps because you stand on the outside, cold, unfeeling, unresponding to the razor's edge that I walk every day, seeking to find and resolve tensions. Perhaps because I give myself to you, but you refuse to give anything to me. Perhaps my back weakens in these moments. I do not know, but perhaps. That's it for tonight. I think I'm on the right track because speaking to my love, my ears popped. Perhaps, maybe I got the message. Allowing myself to embrace the sensuous wave of a woman who touches me like no other. There is a lifting and a joy. A warm glow hovers around my love as we accept what we are and are not together. A warm glow. The headache vanishes. And maybe putting myself before you, moving into stillness that you cannot follow because it's off screen. Maybe this will be the answer to my back pain.